Good evening. I'd like to welcome you all to our evening assembly here at the Sunset Church of Christ. We're glad to have you here. We're going to join together in song and prayer, and we have a lesson from David here in just a few minutes. So our first song is Here We Are But Straying Pilgrims. Here we are but straying pilgrims, here our path is often dim, but to cheer us on our journey still we sing this wayside hymn. Yonder over the rolling river where the shining mansions rise, soon will be our home forever, and the smile of the blessed giver gladdens all our longing eyes. Here our feet are often weary on the hills that throng our way. Here the tempest darkly gathers, but our hearts within us say, yonder over the rolling river where the shining mansions rise, soon will be our home forever, and the smile of the blessed giver gladdens all our longing eyes. Here our souls are often fearful of the pilgrim's lurking foe, but the Lord is our defender, and he tells us we may know, yonder over the rolling river where the shining mansions rise, soon will be our homes forever, and the smile of the blessed giver gladdens all our longing eyes. Let's sing together A Mighty Fortress. A mighty fortress is our God, a bulwark never failing. Our helper, he amid the flood of mortal ills prevailing. For still our ancient foe doth seek to work us woe. His craft and power are great, and armed with cruel hate. On earth is not his equal, and though this world with evil filled should threaten to undo us, we will not fear, for God hath willed His truth to triumph through us. Let rifts of darkness grim, we tremble not for Him. His grace we can endure, for lo, His doom is sure. One little word shall fail Him. And now we'll have our prayer.
Shall we pray? Our Father in heaven, we come to you at this time, thanking you for this opportunity. We could come, freely assemble, worship, and study your word here tonight. Be with our speaker, that the words he has prepared will come and be of encouragement and challenge to us in our walk with you. Be with the sick of our number, we ask that they be brought back to us and be in the assembly as soon as possible. Be with those that have lost loved ones. Comfort and guide them. Help us to be support for them in our ways. Be with us, watch over us and guide us. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. There is a name I love to hear, I love to sing His word. It sounds like music in my ear, the sweetest name on earth. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus. Because He first loved me. I'm going to lower it a little bit. It tells me of a Savior's love who died to set me free. It tells me of His precious blood, the sinner's perfect plea. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus. Because He first loved me. It tells me one whose loving heart can feel my deepest woe, who in each sorrow bears a part that none can bear below. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus. Because He first loved me.
Have thine own way, Lord.
Have thine own way, Lord. Have thine own way. Thou art the potter, I am the clay. Mold me and make me after thy will, while I am waiting, yielded and still. Have thine own way, Lord. Have thine own way. Search me and try me, Master, today. Whiter than snow, Lord, wash me just now, as in thy presence humbly I bow. Have thine own way, Lord, have thine own way. Hold o'er my being, absolute sway. Fill with thy Spirit, till all shall see Christ only always living in me.
All right, after this song, David's going to bring us our lesson. Let's stand together as we sing this song, I Know Whom I Have Believed.
I know not why God's wondrous grace to me He hath made
Thank you. Good evening. It's good to be back with you. I know I'm not Matt. It said Matt on your bulletin this morning, but I'm more handsome than he is anyway. So it's one of those. We just had to kind of switch things at the last minute, and so I'm switching with him, and he'll take one of mine later on, which is nice. He's traveling back from LTC. He might already be back, but last time I was here, we talked about what it means to be at home. And we traveled through and traced this long history through the Bible, this beautiful but challenging theme for us of the idea of exile, right? And how it culminates really in that story of Babylon. We have Adam and Eve there at the very beginning. They're pushed out of the garden to the east. East is Babylon. It becomes synonymous with Babylon. Cain makes his mistake. He's moved further east. Abraham is called out of Babylon. We have Nimrod who establishes Babylon. So all of these things leading to Babylon and this idea of exile that we even find ourselves in today. Remember that they were allowed to come back from Babylon, but when they had rebuilt the temple, it was kind of like they were weeping because they knew the glory of the previous temple that was there before them. And it was kind of like home didn't really feel like home in those moments. And the question we asked ourselves was, can I relate to that? Can I relate to that? There's a big sense in which we find ourselves home with the family of God that's around us, but we're also looking to an ultimate home where we find ourselves living in eternity with God. And so there's a sense in which you and I find ourselves in a little bit of an exilic experience as well. Peter speaks into this a number of times. In 1 Peter, he talks about these people that are exiles or that they're aliens. Even though they've lived there for centuries now and for generations, that has been their home, the people that Peter's addressing in that particular epistle. And so I want to take us a little bit deeper into that because there are several books, especially in our Old Testament, that deal with this idea of exile and being in that exilic experience. And then what does it mean now that I find myself even in an exile of my own in this place that is home, but it doesn't always feel like home because of the culture that's around me, because of laws that are being made, because of governments, different things that are around me. So what do I do in this place? Daniel speaks into this, I think, in a very, very powerful way. So if you want to be making your way over to the book of Daniel, and that's the question that I want us to really begin to ask ourselves this evening. Now that I recognize that I'm a bit of an exile in time, what do I do when I realize that even though this is home, but not really home, how do I act in this place? So just some kind of brief background into the book of Daniel. Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, has come into Jerusalem 3 total times that we know of. And on the 3rd time that he comes into Jerusalem, he completely destroys the place and just utterly annihilates the place. He takes out the best and the brightest and the royal seed line back to Babylon so that he can establish them as his wise men and his wise counsel and put them in these different positions there in Babylon. And we know of 4 that were taken out specifically from Jerusalem to Babylon. We have Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego, and then we have Daniel. And when we're talking about developing this idea of an ethic of an exile, I think maybe the first stop that we need to make is with their names, right? All 4 of these guys are given at birth just beautiful, God-honoring names, right? Honoring the God of all eternity names. And then they get renamed when they are in Babylon. So we have these God-honoring names, right? Hananiah, Mishael, and we're not going to go into what these mean right now. You'll have to trust me, look them up. Azarias and Daniel, and they get renamed to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And then Daniel is this one that I always struggled to pronounce because it's spelled so weirdly. It's Belteshazzar or something like that. Maybe that's why we call him Daniel, right? Because it's so hard to say. And so they're brought in to be these incredible people there in Babylon, and Nebuchadnezzar has given them these positions. And you know, Nebuchadnezzar there in chapter 2, he has just this terrifying dream. And nobody can interpret this dream. And he goes into all of these different things. You know, not only do I want you to interpret the dream, but I want you to actually tell me what the dream was before you interpret it. But I'm not going to tell you what it was. And so you have to tell me what the dream was and then interpret it for me. And of course, nobody can do this for him. But there is one, isn't there? This guy named Daniel, an Israelite. He goes back to his friends, they pray to God, and he approaches King Nebuchadnezzar and he says, hey, I know this dream that you had. And it was a terrifying dream. Let's just kind of read a little bit about what that dream was. There in Daniel chapter 2, starting in verse 31, Daniel says, you saw, O king, and behold, a great image. And that's going to be important here after a moment. An image, right? A great image. And this image, mighty and exceeding brightness, stood before you, and its appearance was frightening. The head of this image was of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, its middle and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, and its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. Right, so he's got this huge image that is there in his dream. And then I paraphrase from here, but there's this thing, right, Nebuchadnezzar, that happens to this image that is set up before you. There's this rock that's cut, maybe from a high mountain or maybe from the heavens itself, and it comes down and it destroys this image that was set before you. And here's the point, right? Here's the point. These are all kingdoms. These are all rulers. You're that head of gold, Nebuchadnezzar, and each one that comes after you is going to be of decreasing value, at least in a sense. And then finally, they will all be wiped out. And that rock that was cut from the heavens, it's going to grow into this mountain, this unshakable mountain kind of thing. And so that image is going to be gone, but there will be a kingdom that is established after these things. You know, and that's kind of an irritating interpretation of an already scary dream, to know that you are about to fail, or at least the kingdom that you're a part of is about to fail. But you know what Nebuchadnezzar does in those moments? He doesn't destroy Daniel. In fact, he exalts Daniel, and he says to Daniel, "There's something special that I want you to hear." I don't have it up there. This is in verse 28 of chapter 2. Actually, chapter 2. $3.28. Yeah, that's the next story. It's in chapter 2. Let me just paraphrase to you. He says, "You know what? I'm going to bless and honor the God of Daniel for who he is and what he allowed Daniel to interpret to me." And it's like, I'm lifting up God, and it's almost like he bows down and worships Daniel there because he's so closely associated with God in those moments. And we think, we get this little inkling. We get this little inkling from Nebuchadnezzar that if he would just kind of turn his mind and turn his heart, that Babylon, this thing that has been such a thorn in the flesh of all of the story up until this point, Babylon might be a light to the world if he would just continue down the particular path of honoring God. But then we get to chapter 3. In chapter 3, we have a totally different story, right? Because even though Nebuchadnezzar has heard of this image being destroyed, the very next thing that he does, it appears, is that he sets up an image for himself. And maybe this is an image of Nebuchadnezzar, or maybe it's an image of Marduk, a typical Babylonian god, or maybe it's some other deity that they're honoring in those moments. But it's this huge statue, 90 feet tall, 8 or 9 stories worth of a golden statue that's there. And here's the instruction, right? When the music is played, all of Babylon and those that are brought in outside of Babylon to be a part of this nation, Israelites, Chaldeans, everybody, right? You bow down. You worship this image. Of course, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they will not bow down in front of this image. So let's just kind of roll back here for a second, right? These guys, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and Daniel, they have all found themselves in exile in this place of Babylon. And they're taking on the names of these people, and they're not really balking up against that. They're not like, oh, these were not our God-given names, right? You're calling me these things, and so they're likely taking on the dress of that place. They're speaking like them, at least to some degree. They're eating the food that is there for them to eat as well. But then there are certain lines in the sand that these guys will not cross. It's this weird kind of mix and balance between loyalty to the place that they find themselves in and the subversion that they have to the nation because of certain things that they can't abide by because it goes against their own moral code that's found and established in God Himself. And so Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego, they refuse to bow down to this particular golden image. And of course, that makes Nebuchadnezzar fiery mad. He says, I'm going to give you another opportunity. I'm going to heat up a fiery furnace. If you hear the music, you bow down. And I want you to hear what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego say to King Nebuchadnezzar. They answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If this be so, if you throw us into the fiery furnace, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and He will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. Interestingly enough, they didn't initially throw it back in the face of Nebuchadnezzar and all of Babylon. They just simply resisted and they refused to bow down. They weren't real loud about it, it doesn't appear. But when they're confronted with it, I think they give probably the most courteous answer to any power authority that they needed to stand against in this way. I don't know how they could have said that any nicer, do you? Right? God will save us, but if He doesn't, we don't have to give an answer to you about this. They're not thumbing their nose up at Him or trying to establish some sort of a revolt, and they're not establishing a rebel alliance or anything like that. They just say, no, we refuse to do this, and our God has the ability to deliver us, but if He doesn't, you got to know, we just can't. We can't do this. We can't do this. And so, of course, we know how this story goes, don't we? Nebuchadnezzar does heat up that furnace. You know, even to this day, archaeologists are finding brick after brick with Nebuchadnezzar's name all over it. And he thought he was pretty good stuff back in the day, back in the short-lived time that he had authority over that particular empire. And those bricks were baked in huge fiery furnaces. I wonder if it was one of those that he had stoked. We know how it goes. He heats it up 7 times. And even those that are getting ready to throw Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego into this fiery furnace, they are destroyed in those moments because of the heat of that place. I wonder if that begins to tell us a little bit about how much Babylon and Nebuchadnezzar thought of human life. They get thrown into the furnace, and Nebuchadnezzar watches them burn, right? Or no. In fact, he doesn't watch them burn. They're walking around inside of the furnace. Hey, didn't we throw 3 guys into that furnace? Yes, O king, we threw 3 guys into that furnace. Then why are there 4, and why does one of them look like an Elohim or a god? Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego come out of there, and they come out of that particular fiery furnace. They don't even smell like smoke. Nebuchadnezzar sees something in those moments. He sees what has happened to these particular men and how God has delivered them, how they have been loyal in one respect to him, but they've also drawn a particular line in the sand that they said, we will never cross over that line. God has delivered them, and Nebuchadnezzar answered and said, blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants, who trusted in him and set aside the king's command and yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I make a decree. Any people, nation, or language that speaks anything against God, the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, shall be torn limb from limb, and their houses laid in ruins. For there is no other God who is able to rescue in this way. Then the king, he promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. This pagan king, who has wreaked such destruction on these people, is now honoring and worshiping the God of all eternity because these guys stood up and didn't cross a particular line. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting that when we're talking about what it means to be an exile and what it means to have an ethic of an exile, there's this interesting balance between loyalty to the place that we find ourselves in and then subversion to that place as well. There are things that I might find in my spirit about the place that I find myself in that are challenging to me, that I dislike sometimes. And there are cultural hills that I want to die on every single day. And we find that these guys just didn't do that all the time. But there were particular lines in the sand, if you will, that they refused to cross, that they refused to step over. And they said, we cannot do that. We cannot do that. Jeremiah speaks into this idea in a very, very clear way for us. In Jeremiah chapter 29, Jeremiah, just some brief history, right? Jeremiah was the prophet, and we've been studying him in class on Sunday mornings, I believe, here. He prophesied that Babylon was coming, that exile was coming, that destruction was coming. And then toward the end there, he witnesses it. Right? Just this traumatic thing that he must have witnessed. And I want us to hear what he says to us, to them, as they experience Babylon in Jeremiah chapter 29, starting in verse 4. He says, thus says Yahweh of hosts, the God of Israel, to all of the exiles whom I have sent into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. Listen to what he says. Build houses and live in them. Plant gardens and eat what they produce. Take wives and have your sons and daughters. Take wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage, that they may bear sons and daughters. Multiply there. In Babylon? Jeremiah, really? In Babylon? Multiply there and do not decrease, but seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile. Seek the welfare. Shouldn't we be forming some sort of rebel alliance? Shouldn't we be standing up to this exile-like experience because this is not God's country? He says, no. Seek the welfare where I have sent you into exile and pray to the Lord on its behalf. For in its welfare you will find your welfare. In its welfare you'll find your welfare. And then a verse that we like to use as devotional literature. Remember, it was written to them specifically. I think we can take application from it. They're skipping down a few verses to Jeremiah 29:11. He says, for surely I know the plans. Why are we doing this, Jeremiah? Because God says, surely I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord. Plans for your welfare and not for harm. To give you a future with hope. Then when you call upon me and come and pray to me, I'll hear you. When you search for me, you will find me, if you seek me with all of your heart. This is the ethic of an exile. And I think that this applies to you and me when we understand that, even though I find a real sense of home with my church family inside of the kingdom of God, there are times that I look around inside of my culture, inside of this nation that I'm in, wherever you find yourself in this world, really, that it just doesn't feel like home, because in a big sense it's not, right? I think this begins to help describe some of the things that Jesus says to us, specifically in the Sermon on the Mountain. The Sermon on the Mountain, it's what we traditionally call it. We traditionally call that first part of the Sermon on the Mountains the Beatitudes, right? I want us to know that those are words that we have specifically come up with, Sermon on the Mountain and Beatitudes, for this little tiny section. And I'm not saying that these are not attitudes that we do not need to inhabit, but I think probably the healthiest lens to look at most of the Sermon on the Mountain is through this idea that I'm in a place where I don't belong. I'm in a place where I don't belong. And so Jesus proclaims that you're living the good life when you recognize these things with the right attitude. And I wish we had time to just pick through all of these. Let me just give you a couple of examples, then I want to move on for just a moment. He says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." Do you feel like you're out of place in this world? It's because you are. Does that crush your spirit down a little bit, knowing that you don't really belong here? He says, "Good. Yours is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted." Do you feel like it could be a whole lot better than it is right now? Because you're trying to live something different. You're trying to live a godly and kingdom lifestyle. He says, "Good. You're going to be comforted." Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Do you ever feel like you don't have power? Or even if you do, that you're not taking that power and that authority into your own hands? You're going to inherit the earth. Like I said, I wish we could pick through that. Just kind of use that lens as you read through these at some point and see how well that fits. I want us to jump down just a little bit to verse 13 there, just right after what we read. Familiar verse to us. He says, "You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt has lost its taste, how can its saltiness be restored? It's no longer good for anything, but it's thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. City built on a hill, it cannot be hid. No one, after lighting a lamp, puts it under the bushel basket, but on the lampstand, and it gives light to all in the household. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven." Isn't this exactly what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego did? We can't cross that particular line. We're going to be a light to Babylon. And what did Nebuchadnezzar do in those moments? He praised. The pagan king of Babylon praised and honored God in heaven because of what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego refused to do in those moments. They were a light unto the world. Jesus talks more about this, and I think this was where this begins to draw it all together, at least in my mind and my heart. In Matthew chapter 22, the Pharisees have come up to Jesus, and they say, "Hey, listen, should you pay these taxes or shouldn't you pay these taxes to Rome?" Right? And they're trying to entrap him, right? If he says, "No, yeah, you should pay those taxes to Rome," then he is a Roman sympathizer, right? And Rome is the new big bad guy on the scene, right? They're the new Babylon on the scene, if you will. So if you should pay those taxes to Rome, then you're a Roman sympathizer. But if you say, "No, you shouldn't pay those taxes to Rome," all of a sudden you're this rebel, you're this revolt starter, and you have other problems that are coming your direction there. And of course, we know how Jesus answers this. Let's just read it together. "Tell us then, what's your opinion? Is it right to pay the imperial tax to Caesar or not? Jesus, knowing their evil intent, said, "You hypocrites, why are you trying to trap me? Show me the coin used for paying the tax." And they brought him a denarius. And he asked them, don't miss it, whose image is this? And whose inscription? Caesar's, they replied, obviously. A little picture of Caesar there imprinted on the front of the coin. Caesar's image. Then he said to them, "So give back to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's." You catching the implications of this? Right? When we are establishing, at least in our hearts, and I wish I could just line this out for us, like do this and this and this. This is something that needs to live deeply in our spirits as we move out into this world. Because I don't have a 1, 2, or 3, but once this gets into our bloodstream, I think it's more effective anyway. Right? Give back to Caesar what's Caesar's. Well, what bears the image of Caesar, that's what we give back to him. Don't you miss the second part. Give back to God what's his. Well, what's God's? It's what bears his image. What bears God's image? You do. I do. I do. And so we make sure that in everything that we are giving ourselves back to God. And that kingdom that was established when Nebuchadnezzar had his first dream, his first terrifying dream, it was of a stone being cut, crushing the image that he had the dream of, and that stone becoming this mountain. Christian, you and I are part of that mountain kingdom that old Nebuchadnezzar had a dream of back so many years ago. It's an unshakable kingdom. And so here's the question. Where do your loyalties primarily reside? Where do they reside? Do they reside in this government, in this location, or are they primarily toward an unshakable kingdom that God has established through his Son, Jesus Christ? This begins to step on my patriotic toes a little bit, if I'm honest with you. It does. I love this place that I'm in. I love the freedoms that we have. I love the people. I love at least parts of our culture. And there are things that irk on me about our culture as well. Do I need to die on every single cultural hill that I'm presented with that I disagree with? No. Are there certain lines in the sand that I need to also draw and make sure that I'm honoring God and glorifying him? Absolutely. Right? When I was in Nicaragua, loved the people of Nicaragua. Tried to speak like them, tried to dress like them, tried to act like them, but there were parts of that culture as well that I said, this and no further. I can't. Seek the good, embrace what you can, draw the line in the sand when you have to. It's an idea of loyalty and subversion at the same time. Peter, again, speaking to the exiles, he says, "Beloved, I urge you as aliens and exiles to abstain from the desires of the flesh that wage war against the soul. Conduct yourselves honorably among the Gentiles, so that though they malign you as evildoers, they may see your honorable deeds and glorify God when he comes to judge." It's what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego did, isn't it? They were a light. Nebuchadnezzar saw their good deeds and praised God in heaven. This is Daniel. This is Jesus. And Peter is drawing on all of these things and applying them to you and to me. he continues, for the Lord's sake, accept the authority of every human institution, whether of the emperor as supreme, or of governors as sent by him to punish those who do wrong and to praise those who do right. For it is God's will that by doing right you should silence the ignorance of the foolish. As servants of God, live as free people, yet don't use your freedom as a pretext for evil. Honor everyone, love the family of believers, fear God, honor the emperor. Fear God, honor the place where you live. This is the ethic of an exile. I don't know where this specifically leaves you and how you begin to process any of this evening. But as you think about it, as you move out into the world from this place, how are you going to engage a culture and a world that you may find very disagreeable, that you might be challenged by, right? And again, this is far more complex and far more nuanced than me aligning myself with any political aisle on one side or the other. So how are you going to conduct yourself as you continue to be in this time of exile yourself before you reach your ultimate home? If you have any need this evening, we want to stand here and offer our help, our prayers, as we take you before the King. We're going to sing a song. If you have any need, would you come while we stand and sing?
Stand up for Jesus, ye soldiers of the cross. Lift high its royal banner, it must not suffer loss. From victory unto victory, his army shall he lead. Till every foe is vanquished, for Christ is Lord indeed. Stand up for Jesus, the strife will not be long. This day the noise of battle, the next the victor's song. To him that overcometh, a crown of life shall he. He with the King of glory shall reign eternally.
All right, if you were unable to partake of the Lord's Supper this morning, it's been prepared for you during this next song, our closing song. You can go down this hallway to room 225 and partake of the Lord's Supper. Let's sing this closing song, Send the Light. There's a call comes ringing o'er the restless way.